purification of the self-nature. With the first kind, absence of conditioning factors, the required factors for conditioning are not present. This state of unconditioned extinction that is unselected can sometimes be experienced by ordinary people or those of the two vehicles. 4 is unconditioned unmoving extinction. Unmoving refers to cultivation of the samadhi of not moving. This kind of unmovingness is original and basic stillness. It is not the kind of non-movement attained in the no-thought samadhi. Therefore, this is unconditioned unmoving extinction. 5 is unconditioned extinction of feeling and thinking. With the previous unconditioned unmoving extinction, one is reborn in the heavens of the form realm. With the attainment of unconditioned extinction of feeling and thinking, one is reborn in the formless realm. When one reaches the formless realm, one's mind is not moved by suffering or by pleasure. There is no concept of what is meant by suffering or what is meant by pleasure. One is not shaken by either of those states.
It is not like we people who, upon encountering a state of suffering cannot stand it, and upon meeting a state of pleasure want to pursue it. We run around in pursuit of things. For example, you hear someone say, "Ah, here's something that doesn't exist in this country. It's really good to eat." You say, "Really? I'll try some," and you go running after flavor. Do you see? That is your mind being moved by pain and pleasure. But when one is certified to this unconditioned extinction of feeling and thinking, pleasure and pain no longer move one's mind. You can experience pleasure and endure pain without any kind of effort on your part. You do not have to use patience to do it. You just basically do not move in the midst of it. This again is fundamentally everything's okay. When you are unmoved by suffering or happiness, you have achieved this kind of samadhi of unconditioned extinction of feeling and thinking. That is the 5th.
Take a look. When you think, what do you think of? When you feel, what do you feel? You think about and feel pleasure and pain. But when these do not move your mind, then you have achieved unconditioned extinction of feeling and thinking. Are there any of you who cultivate the way who have managed to cultivate to this state? If you get to this state, you can go to the heavens of the formless realm, specifically, the 5 heavens of no return, which are where arhats of the third fruition abide. When you have cultivated to the point that you do not register pain or pleasure, then that is like Shariputra's uncle, who held the doctrine of non-acceptance of anything. His meaning was that he did not accept pleasure or pain, and this was supposed to indicate that he had that power samadhi. But when the Buddha asked him, "Well, do you accept your own view on this?" Shariputra's uncle was stuck. He could not come up with an answer, because basically his doctrine of non-acceptance was itself a viewpoint. If he was not accepting views, then basically he could not accept his own doctrine.
By asking one simple question, the Buddha toppled his doctrine. That is because the uncle still had not reached the state of everything's okay. Since Shariputra was still holding this doctrine of non-acceptance, he was thereby defeated. Did he accept his non-acceptance? If he could have been without acceptance or non-acceptance, then there also would have been no victory or defeat. That is the nature of the unconditioned. 6 is unconditioned true thusness. What is true thusness? You may say, "I've heard this explained before." True thusness is one's basic Buddha nature, also called nirvana, and also known as the nature of the treasury of the thus come one. It has many names. That's true thusness, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But you still do not recognize what that is, even less do you know what it is not. What is that? It is non-falseness and non-inversion. Being non-false and non-inverted is being, thus, unmoving, clear and constantly understanding. That is true thusness. In order to know true thusness, we must first know about the 3 natures. The 3 natures 1. The nature pervasively calculated and attached to. 2. The nature that arises dependent on something else. 3. The perfectly accomplished real nature. We living beings have the first 2 kinds of inversion, while true thusness is the perfectly accomplished real nature. To illustrate the nature pervasively calculated and attached to, suppose you were walking at night and you thought you had spotted a huge snake on the road ahead. You might shout, Wow. That's a really long snake. It's several feet long. How horrible. Seeing a snake in the distance like that is the nature pervasively calculated and attached to, and leads to your being terrified and deciding, oh. A snake. I've got to get out of here right away. So you go running back down the road and overtake a person who had earlier passed the same spot you were approaching when you thought you saw the snake.
The person asks you, "Why are you running?" You reply, "You just came along that road. Didn't you see the big snake back there?" "Where?" says the other fellow. "Why don't we go back and see where it is, and we can beat it to death?" So the two of you go back, but when you get there it is no longer a snake. It has turned into something else, a piece of rope lying on the road. That it is not a snake is the nature that arises dependent on something else. Considering it to be a snake to begin with was the nature pervasively calculated and attached to. Now it becomes the nature that arises dependent on something else, basically it is a piece of rope. So the nature pervasively calculated and attached to was false, imaginary. However, the nature that arises dependent on something else turns out to be a distortion, for in fact the rope itself is made out of hemp. That it is made of hemp is the perfectly accomplished real nature. What started out as hemp could turn into a piece of rope and then could turn into a snake. Who would you say caused it to transform?
True thusness is non-false, non-distorted, and not inverted. That is what is meant when it is said of people who have perfected their cultivation that they have ended all falseness and have already exhausted all inversion, so they are no longer upside down. That is the perfectly accomplished real nature, also known as true thusness. However, this true thusness is still not genuine true thusness. Because, what you can detect can still not be called real. Real true thusness is that basically there is no true thusness. Real true thusness is nothing at all. There is no common identity and no distinction. There are no dharmas and no non-dharmas. This refers to the basic substance of each and every dharma, in the same way that water has waves, but the waves are not the water. Water is its own substance.
And true thusness is the basic substance of all dharmas. If it were not for true thusness, then dharmas would lack a basic substance. It is like the rope. The rope's basic substance is hemp. True thusness is not singular, and yet it is non-dual. It is identical and yet not different, not dharmas and yet not non-dharmas. That is genuine true thusness, the sixth unconditioned dharma. Shastra, what is meant by there being no self? There are, in general, two kinds of non-self, one, the non-self of Pujjala, and two, the non-self of dharmas. Commentary.